Have you ever heard someone laugh at you about something you built? Not laugh with you. Laugh at you. That's how I found out I wasn't invited to my own son's grand opening. The laugh came first. Light, comfortable, almost playful. Like the person on the other end of the phone had no idea she was standing on a foundation she didn't understand. Minutes earlier, another investor had called me to say congratulations. He told me the launch looked beautiful. He told me Terrell looked confident. And he told me he assumed I had been right there beside him. I hadn't. I dialed my son immediately, still believing there had to be a mistake, a scheduling oversight, something simple. His wife answered. I kept my voice calm. I heard the opening went well, I said. I just wanted to confirm something. And she laughed. Oh, she said, easy as Sunday morning. It was 8 weeks ago. We only invited close family and friends. 8 weeks. Close family and friends. I didn't interrupt her. And I let the silence do its work, because silence tells you who stands where. In the background, I heard him, my son, not confused, not correcting her, present. He didn't say, that's my mother. He didn't say, of course she's family. He let it stand. That silence told me more than the laugh did. My name is Calandra Vaughn, and I don't fund dreams. I fund structure. The $500,000 I put into that company wasn't a sentimental gift from a proud mother. It was structured capital, documented, layered, protected, released in phases, designed by someone who understands ownership better than applause. When someone laughs about what you structured, they're not disrespecting your feelings. They're underestimating your paperwork. If you're watching this right now, tell me what time it is where you are. I want to know who understands what it feels like to hear your child choose comfort over correction. I asked for Terrell. He's in a meeting, she replied smoothly. In the background, I heard the soft clink of glasses. Celebration, not a meeting. That's when my heart stopped feeling emotional and started feeling strategic, because exclusion is personal, but documentation is permanent. I reminded her gently that my investment wasn't pocket change. It wasn't charity. It wasn't emotional support disguised as capital. Her laugh thinned, just slightly. She said, "We'll talk when things calm down." Calm down. And I thanked her. Not sarcastically, not bitterly, sincerely, because in that single moment she had confirmed everything I needed to know. I ended the call, walked to my desk, opened the folder I created the day I wrote that check, and made one decision. I thanked her. Then I called my attorney. The next morning, I sat at my dining table with a legal pad in front of me and my laptop open, not because I wanted to work, but because that is what my hands do when my heart needs somewhere to put its weight. The house was quiet in the way it gets when you live long enough to stop filling silence with noise. I could still hear Yasmin's laugh if I let myself, but I didn't. I kept my mind on what was real: paper, dates, commitments, patterns. I learned a long time ago that feelings will tell you something is wrong, but structure tells you what to do about it. I wasn't born into ease. I was born into expectation. Not the kind of expectation that teaches you how to stretch what you have without ever looking like you're stretching it. When my parents passed, what they left me wasn't a fortune. It was enough to tempt me into comfort if I wanted it, enough to convince me to sit down and coast. I didn't. I looked at that money like it was a living thing, like it could grow or die depending on who touched it. I didn't inherit wealth. I inherited responsibility. I paid off what needed paying, and I invested what could be invested, and I kept my pride out of it. I watched markets the way other women watch television. I read contracts the way some people read devotionals. I learned to listen to what people avoided saying as much as what they said out loud. That's how you survive long enough to build something that lasts. My first business started small, the way most real businesses do, one client at a time, one invoice at a time. 1 month, where you barely breathe because payroll is coming and your name is on every promise. I remember a Tuesday night when the numbers didn't add up and the office lights had been off for hours, and I was still sitting there with a calculator, realizing the difference between a dream and a company is the part where you stay when nobody is clapping. I stayed. I negotiated. I learned which vendors would squeeze you and which ones would grow with you. I learned that charisma can open a door, but governance keeps you inside. Years later, I sold that first company at a table where the men across from me kept calling me ma'am, like they were surprised I belonged there. They smiled hard, offered compliments, tried to soften me before they tried to shave the price. I didn't argue. I slid my terms back across the table and let the silence do what it does. When they signed, they didn't sign because I was loud. They signed because I was right. The second business came after that, bigger and cleaner, built with the mistakes from the first one tucked under it like rebar. By the time I sold that one, I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was chasing stability. I was building the kind of foundation that made a family breathe easier. That's what Terrell grew up watching, even if he only absorbed the parts he liked. He saw the closing dinners, the handshakes, the moments where people said my name with respect. He did not always see the nights where I was quiet in my room or calculating risk with a pen in my mouth and my shoulders tight, because a woman can carry a world and still look put together at church the next morning. In those years, I learned the difference between support and surrender. Support is a choice. Surrender is a habit. I have never confused support with surrender. That line sat in my chest now, not as a slogan, but as a boundary I'd earned. And I opened my laptop and pulled up folders I hadn't touched in a while, the ones with the boring names that keep your life from falling apart, holding company documents, old closing statements, notes from attorneys I've trusted. I didn't do this because I was angry. I did it because the laugh reminded me of a type of person I've met before. People who think presence equals power. People who mistake your calm for consent. The kind who call you after they've already decided you don't matter, and still expect your resources to answer like a loyal dog. I clicked into another folder and saw Terrell's email from months earlier, the one where he asked if we could talk about funding. I remembered the way his voice sounded that night on my porch, careful, proud, trying to act like he was only asking for advice while his eyes begged for capital. He didn't say he needed me. He said he wanted me to believe in it. I believed in him. I just never believed in blind trust. My phone sat face down beside the legal pad. I didn't touch it. I didn't call him back. I didn't send a message that would let him think this was about feelings. I wrote one line at the top of the pad and underlined it twice. What was promised and what was signed. Then I turned to the cabinet behind me where I keep the things that matter and pulled out the folder with his name on it. When Terrell asked me for $500,000, I didn't reach for emotion. I reached for documentation. Though Terrell brought the business plan to my house on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of Sunday where the air is calm, but you can feel storms hiding behind people's smiles. He didn't call it a business plan at first. He called it an idea. He walked in holding a slim laptop case like it was a briefcase, like he wanted his body to speak confidence before his mouth did. Yasmin followed behind him, dressed like they were going somewhere after this, hair smooth, nails done, perfume soft but intentional. She hugged me and told me I looked good, the way people compliment you when they need the room to stay friendly. Terrell set his laptop on my coffee table and looked at it for a second too long before opening it, like he was praying it would speak for him. I watched his hands. My son has always had expressive hands, even as a boy. Hands that reached first, that grabbed the world before his mind finished negotiating with it. Now those same hands moved over a trackpad with the seriousness of a man trying to build his own name. I've been working on this, he said, and his voice was steady, but the steadiness had effort in it. He pulled up slides, charts, a clean logo, a product outline. He talked about a problem he had seen at his last job, talked about the way companies lose money because they don't manage what they can't track, and I talked about software like it was a bridge people didn't know they needed until they were already drowning. I listened without interrupting, because men like Terrell need room to hear themselves think. Every so often, he glanced at Yasmin, and she nodded in a way that fed him. Not support like water, support like gasoline. "We've tested it," he said, and I noticed how quickly he said we. "We've gotten feedback, so we're ready to build it for real." He said, "For real," like he was tired of being treated like a child. Then he slid into the part he had practiced most, funding. He didn't say the number immediately. He built up to it like a sermon. He talked about the market, about growth, about timing. He talked about how people were already moving in this space and how he needed to move faster. His pride sat right in the center of his words, not the ugly kind, the human kind, and the kind a black man carries when he wants to prove he didn't just inherit opportunity, he created it. "Mom," he said, and the way he said it was careful, respectful, but the respect had a boundary built into it. "I'm not coming to you like a kid. I'm coming to you like a founder." Yasmin's lips pressed into a small smile, like she appreciated the phrasing. Then Terrell said the number, 500,000. Not like a request, like a plan. I didn't flinch. I didn't widen my eyes. I didn't do any of the theater people expect from mothers when money is mentioned. I simply asked him what his timeline was and what he planned to do with the first portion. He answered quickly, too quickly, like he'd rehearsed the right words but hadn't sat long enough with the weight of them. Yasmin leaned forward then, voice smooth. "We're trying to do this the right way," she said. "We don't want outside people controlling us." The word outside landed wrong, because I was sitting in my own house. Terrell nodded. "That's the part I need you to understand," he said, and now his tone shifted. This wasn't about money anymore, this was about power. "I need independence," he said. "I need boundaries." He used those words like a shield, like I was the kind of mother who would take over if given a finger. I held my gaze on him. "Boundaries are healthy," I said, and I meant it. "Clarity is healthy." He exhaled like he expected a fight. Yasmin's eyes flicked to his face, then back to mine, like she was tracking who had control of the room. Terrell sat up straighter. "If you invest," he said, "we don't want co-ownership." He said it like he was being mature, like he was preventing future conflict. But I could hear the other thing under it. Ego. The part of him that wanted to be able to say he did this, without my name attached too loudly. "We'll take your advice," he added quickly, "and of course you'll get your money back. Oh, we'll make you whole." Yasmin nodded again, and her nod had certainty in it, like she was already spending money that wasn't in their account yet. I didn't correct them in that moment. I didn't lecture about what co-ownership actually means or what making me whole can look like depending on what is signed. I watched my son's face, watched the tension behind his eyes, watched the way he wanted two things at once, my resources and my distance. That combination always costs something. And he looked at me like he was waiting for the mother version of me, the one that softens. But the version of me sitting there was the one that survived negotiation rooms. I let the quiet sit long enough for him to feel it. Then I nodded slowly, like I was agreeing to the surface of what he said. "All right," I told him, calm as a woman setting a chess piece down without announcing the game. "We can do it your way." Terrell's shoulders dropped with relief. Yasmin's smile widened like she had won something. And I let them both believe it because I already knew how to protect myself without demanding a title. 2 days after Terrell left my living room with that relief on his face, I told him to meet me downtown in a conference room I'd used before. Neutral walls, clean glass table, a pitcher of water nobody ever touched until they were nervous. Terrell arrived early, tie on, shoulders squared like he was stepping into adulthood again. Yasmin came 10 minutes later, phone in hand, moving like the meeting was already hers. I didn't bring a speech. I brought a folder, a pen, and the part of myself that never got sentimental about numbers. Terrell started talking the moment we sat. He tried to keep the same confident rhythm from my house, but the room changed him. Rooms like that don't let you perform for long. They make you show what you know. "This is just to make things official," he said. And he smiled at me like I was his mother first. I let him have that smile for 1 second. Then I slid the folder forward. "This is to make things clear," I corrected gently, and I watched his eyes dip to the paper like they had weight. Yasmin leaned in, scanning like she was searching for advantage. I didn't rush. I asked Terrell to explain, in plain words, who owned the product he was building. He blinked once, then said, "I do. We do." Yasmin nodded fast. I tapped the paper lightly. "And I'm not asking who believes they own it," I said. "I'm asking who owns it on paper." Terrell's mouth tightened. He started talking about developers, about work for hire, about how everything was in progress. In progress is the phrase people use when they want money before they've built protection. I asked for projections next, not the dreamy kind, the ones tied to actual paying customers. Terrell had numbers, but they floated. And I asked what revenue looked like in 6 months if only 2 clients signed. I asked what it looked like if none did. He shifted in his chair. Yasmin crossed her legs and kept her smile in place like armor. "We're confident," she said. "Confidence doesn't pay invoices," I replied, still calm. "Structure does." Terrell tried to laugh it off, but his laugh didn't land. I asked who had authority to sign vendor contracts. He said, "I do." I asked who could access the company bank account. He said, "Me and Yasmin." I watched Yasmin's eyes brighten at that. I asked who would approve spending over a certain amount. Terrell opened his mouth, then closed it. That pause told me everything. They wanted freedom, but they hadn't built any discipline to hold it. I asked about reporting, what I would receive, how often and in what form. Terrell's face hardened. "Mom," he said, and his tone was respectful but edged. "I thought you said you weren't trying to control it." There it was, and the accusation people use when you ask them for accountability. I didn't bristle. I didn't defend myself. I simply held his gaze and said, "I don't fund dreams. I fund structure." Yasmin let out a small breath, like she was offended on his behalf. Terrell stared at me like he was trying to decide whether I was being unfair. I stayed steady. "You asked for 500,000, I continued. "You asked for belief. Belief without documentation is just emotion, and I'm not here to fund emotion." The room quieted, and in that quiet, Terrell's pride had nowhere to hide. I told them I would not be the only one putting money into this, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want my son confusing my support for ownership he could ignore. I told them I was bringing in a small group of investors I trusted, people who respected process and didn't panic when numbers got uncomfortable. Yasmin's smile slipped. "More people means more opinions," she said. "More people means more accountability," I answered. "That's the point." Terrell rubbed his jaw like he was swallowing irritation. He wanted to be the man in the room. I understood that. I just refused to let his need for pride become his weakness. I explained the money would not land in one lump sum. It would come in phases. First portion to cover what they needed to start, the next portion released only after certain work was completed and certain reporting was delivered. Terrell leaned back, the tension rising. "So we have to ask you every time?" he said. "No," I replied. "You have to meet the milestones you agreed to." Yasmin's voice softened into that polite sweetness again. "Terrell is capable," she said like I was doubting him. "I know he's capable," I said. That's why I'm building something that can survive capability and still outlive ego." Terrell's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, he looked like a boy who wanted to argue with his mother. Then he remembered the room, the folder, the fact that this wasn't a kitchen table conversation anymore. He asked what it was called, this structure I was putting together. I gave him the simplest version I could without turning the meeting into a lecture. An investment vehicle, a holding arrangement, a way to protect everyone's money and keep decisions traceable. He nodded like he understood enough to accept it. Yasmin nodded like she understood enough to resent it. Before we ended, and I slid one last document across the table and watched their faces as they skimmed the first page like it was routine. "Read it," I said quietly. "Every line." Terrell smiled, tense and eager, and said, "It's fine. We trust you." I didn't smile back. Trust is not a replacement for reading. The operating agreement said more than they realized. I learned early that people love the parts of business that look good on camera. The handshakes, the logos, the smiling pictures where everybody looks like they're winning. What most people don't love is the part where a pen scratches paper and the room goes quiet because the real power is being decided without a single flash going off. Ownership isn't who smiles in photos. Ownership is who signs. I said that to myself the morning we finalized Terrell's deal because I could already feel what he and Yasmin were trying to do. Hold my money with open hands and my influence at arm's length, till like those two things weren't connected. We met again in that same conference room. Terrell came with more confidence this time. He had a new laptop sleeve, a sharper haircut, and a tone that suggested he'd been practicing being the boss. Yasmin came dressed like a brand. Clean lines, expensive bag, the kind of look that tells the world you're attached to success even before success arrives. They sat across from me like partners preparing to sign a future they believed they already owned. I watched them in the small moments. The way Terrell kept glancing at Yasmin when a clause looked unfamiliar. The way Yasmin's eyes moved faster than her comprehension, like she was hunting for the part that benefited them and skipping the part that protected anybody else. My attorney was there, quiet and precise, the kind of person who doesn't fill silence because silence keeps people honest. Terrell kept calling him sir, like respect could substitute for attention. Down when the first signature page slid across the table, Terrell reached for the pen too quickly, like he was afraid the deal might change its mind. "We're good," he said, smiling at me. "We just want to move." I didn't stop him from signing. I stopped the story he was telling himself. "Move with your eyes open," I said, and I tapped the page where the responsibilities sat in plain language. Yasmin gave me a tight smile. "We're reading," she said, but her voice had impatience in it. Terrell signed, so Yasmin signed. Then the documents that mattered most came out, the ones people call standard, when they don't want to admit they don't understand them. I watched Terrell's face when the conversation shifted from inspiration to control. Who could authorize spending? What reports had to be delivered? What happened when milestones weren't met? His jaw tightened, then relaxed when he saw the word flexible in one section. He clung to that word like it was freedom. Yasmin clung to the section that listed her as an authorized user on certain accounts, her eyes brightening like she'd just secured her seat at the table permanently. I let them both enjoy their small victories because I wasn't there to wrestle pride. I was there to build survivability. When the topic turned to the product itself, the technology Terrell was building, I asked one question that always makes founders shift in their chair. Now, where does the ownership of the core work sit until the conditions are met? Terrell frowned. "In the company?" he said quickly. My attorney didn't speak. He just looked at Terrell and waited. Terrell's confidence wavered for the first time that day. Yasmin glanced at him, then back at me, and the politeness in her eyes sharpened. I kept my voice calm, the same way I keep my voice calm when the truth is about to embarrass someone. It sits protected, I said, or until you satisfy what you agreed to satisfy. Terrell's fingers tightened around the pen. Protected how? He asked. Not rude, just smaller. I explained it the only way I knew how, simple enough to understand, firm enough to matter. The company would operate with access. It would build, sell, and grow under a license arrangement that kept the foundation secure while the structure proved itself. That license wasn't punishment. It was protection. Against mistakes, against confusion, against the kind of greed that creeps in when people start believing the money belongs to them instead of the mission. Yasmin leaned back, and her smile went thin. So you own it, she said softly, like she was trying to paint me as controlling. Terrell's eyes flashed, quick and defensive. Mom, he said, we're not trying to be difficult. We just need space. Space. That word again. Space is what people ask for when they want your resources without your reach. I didn't argue with them, and I didn't shame them. I simply said, space is fine. Accountability stays. My attorney slid another page forward and Terrell skimmed, eyes moving fast. He landed on the part that said the arrangement would adjust once specific conditions were met. Reports delivered, milestones hit, governance honored. His shoulders dropped. He found the relief clause. That's what he was reading for. Yasmin found it too, and she relaxed like she'd just won a private battle. Terrell smiled, almost playful. So, see, he said, looking at Yasmin. It's temporary. Temporary. The way he said it made me realize something. He thought this was just paperwork that would sit in a drawer and never rise up. He thought because I was his mother, I wouldn't treat this like business when feelings got involved. He thought the engine would always run because he was behind the wheel. I watched him sign the final page, watched Yasmin sign with a flourish, watched the pen marks settle like quiet promises. Now, when we stood to leave, Terrell hugged me a little too quickly, like he wanted the warmth to erase the tension. We're going to make you proud, he said. Yasmin's hug was lighter, almost careful, like she didn't want to press too close to the woman she was already trying to keep outside. I walked out of that room steady but not fooled. They believed they controlled the deal because they controlled the narrative. They believed a signature was the end of a conversation. And they didn't understand a signature is the beginning of consequences. They were running the engine under a license, and they didn't treat that like a serious thing. 8 weeks is a long time when someone is choosing you out of a story on purpose. It doesn't happen in one loud moment. It happens in small edits, a sentence cut here, a name left out there, a silence that becomes a habit. After the signing, when Terrell stayed busy in the way young men get busy when they want to feel untouchable, late nights, early mornings, calls that ended the second I answered, texts that sounded like he was talking through a door. The first week I told myself it was normal. A startup is hungry. It eats time. I gave him space the way a mother gives space when she knows her child is trying to become himself. The second week, the calls got shorter. We're in the middle of something, he'd say, breath tight like he was always running. I'll call you back. He didn't. The third week, Yasmin started answering more. Not every time, just enough to make it feel like an accident instead of a pattern. Her tone was always polished, always pleasant, always a little too smooth. He's in meetings, she'd say. He's exhausted. He's trying to focus. She said focus, like the problem was my timing, not their avoidance. I didn't argue. I listened. And I heard how her voice sat between me and my son like a curtain that could be pulled at will. Terrell let it happen. Not because he didn't notice, because it served him. There's a particular kind of pride that comes when a man believes he's finally building something without anyone's shadow stretching across it. I could feel that pride in him, even through his distance. When he did call, he'd sound energized, Like talking fast about progress and momentum, and he'd throw little phrases in like he was practicing how he'd sound to investors. We're scaling. We're tightening. We're getting traction. He didn't say my name. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say, we couldn't do this without you. He said we, like the word itself, was a shield. I saw it happening in real time, the way he was letting Yasmin shape the story of them. She posted little pieces of their life online, not too much, just enough to build a narrative. Terrell at a laptop, coffee cups, a caption about building from scratch. Yasmin at a table with papers spread out, a caption about late nights and big dreams. People love that kind of story. People love the idea of a couple building something out of pure grit. They don't love the quiet truth that structure is usually paid for by someone who doesn't need to perform. I watch those posts without liking them. I watch the comments too. The ones praising Yasmin for being a real partner. The ones calling Terrell self-made. Each time I saw that phrase, something in me tightened. Not because I wanted credit, but because I knew what self-made actually looks like. Self-made looks like reading every line before you sign. Self-made looks like turning down applause until the numbers match. Terrell was enjoying the applause early. He was letting it feed him. He and Yasmin were united in that. I could tell, because when I finally pressed him one evening, kept my voice calm and asked him to stop avoiding me, he didn't deny it. He sighed like I was making his life harder. "Mom," he said, "I'm not avoiding you. I'm just trying to keep things simple." Simple. That word always makes my skin prickle. Simple means controlled. Simple means selective. "We'll celebrate properly later," he added quick, like he was tossing me a bone. "I'll thank you later. I promise." I held the phone close and felt the sting of that later. Later is what people say when they want you to accept crumbs without realizing you're hungry. I kept my tone even. "I don't need celebration," I told him. "I need clarity." He paused. I heard Yasmin in the background, not loud enough to catch her words, but enough to hear her presence. Terrell's voice lowered. "Yasmin thinks it's better if we keep it tight right now," he said. "Less noise. Less pressure." He didn't say it like he was blaming her. He said it like he agreed. His pride and her greed were holding hands. He wanted independence. She wanted control. Together, they created a story where I was optional, and that story was starting to spread. Around week 6, I got a call from one of the investors in my circle. Casual at first, talking about industry news, talking about business like we always do. Then his voice shifted. "I saw the branding roll out," he said carefully. "They'll look sharp." I thanked him. He paused again, and the pause had that same weight I'd felt before. "I didn't see your name anywhere," he added. "Is that intentional?" My stomach went still, not from surprise, but from confirmation. The edits weren't just happening in my family. They were visible to the people who mattered. The investor network was starting to notice I was being erased. The proof didn't arrive like gossip. It arrived like a headline, clean, public, permanent. Then I was standing in line at the grocery store when my phone lit up with a notification from LinkedIn. Terrell's face in a suit, smiling beside Yasmin in a white blazer. Both of them in front of a step and repeat banner with their logo printed crisp and bold, like it had always belonged to them. Under the photo, the caption read, "Grand Opening. 8 weeks ago." I didn't scroll at first. My thumb froze on the screen like it didn't want to carry the truth up any further. Or then I did what I've always done when something feels wrong. I collected information. I opened the post, I read the comments, I saw people congratulating them, tagging friends, calling Terrell visionary, calling Yasmin the backbone, calling the company self-made. I felt my face stay calm while my chest tightened, because I've learned how to keep my emotions from spilling in public places. The cashier asked if I wanted paper or plastic. I answered like nothing was happening. And I drove home with the groceries sitting heavy in my trunk like they were stones. By the time I got into my kitchen, a press feature had been forwarded to me by someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A polite little email with a link and one line, "Proud of your son." I clicked it. There was Terrell again, photographed in a bright office space I recognized from the lease documents, his hand on a glass door like he was the owner of the world behind it. Yasmin stood beside him in another photo, pointing at a screen, lips parted mid-sentence like she was explaining strategy to the camera. The article called them a power couple, building a solution from scratch. It quoted Terrell talking about how we bootstrapped and sacrificed. I read that word, bootstrapped, and something in me went cold. Not because I needed credit, because I needed honesty. Bootstrapped meant they were rewriting the story in a way that made my involvement feel invisible, optional, almost embarrassing. I sat down at my table, spread the printed article out like evidence, and stared at it until my eyes stopped blinking so hard. This was not just erasure. This was performance. And performance always has an audience. The investor who called me yesterday wasn't the only one noticing. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Another congratulations. Someone asking if I was at the opening. Someone saying they were surprised they didn't see me. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. And I simply reached for my phone and called Terrell. I told myself I was calling to confirm because I didn't want to believe it. That was the gentle lie I gave my heart. The truth was sharper. I needed to hear it from his mouth because denial can survive screenshots, but it can't survive a voice. The call rang twice. Then Yasmin answered, cheerful in that overly bright way people get when they feel in control. "Hey, Ms. Vaughn," she said, dragging the honorific out like it was a kindness. I kept my voice steady. I told her I'd seen the post. I told her I'd read the article. I told her investors were asking questions. She laughed before I finished. Same laugh, same careless ease. "Oh," she said, "that." Then she gave it to me again, like she enjoyed the sound of it. It was 8 weeks ago. We only invited close family and friends. She didn't stumble. She didn't soften. She didn't correct herself. She said it clean like a boundary line drawn in fresh paint. And I held the phone to my ear and let the silence stretch again, because the silence is where you hear who people really are. In that silence, I heard Terrell's voice in the background, muffled, close, unmistakable. He wasn't in a meeting. He was right there. I heard him laugh, too, low and quick, like a man enjoying a joke he didn't think would cut the person listening. Then I heard him say my name, not directly to me, but to her, like I was a topic they were handling together. "What's she saying?" he asked. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't respectful either. They carried irritation, like my call was an inconvenience in the middle of their day. Yasmin covered the mouthpiece just enough for the sound to shift, but not enough to hide her tone when she answered him. "She saw the post," she said lightly. "She's asking about the opening." Then she came back to me with that same smooth politeness. "Terrell is busy," she said. "Well, we're in the middle of a client thing." Client thing. Not a meeting, not a crisis, a vague phrase designed to keep me outside. I said one simple sentence. "Put him on," I told her, calm and quiet. There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough for me to hear them exchange a look through the phone. Then Terrell's voice came on, and it was careful, controlled, not angry, not apologetic. "Mom," he said, like he wanted the word to soften what he was about to allow. "Hey, we'll talk later." Later, again. He didn't correct Yasmin's close family and friends. He didn't say, "That's not what she meant." He didn't say, "Of course you're family." He let it sit there like it was true. His silence wrapped around her laugh and made it official. That was the betrayal. Not the party, not the pictures, not even the article. The betrayal was my son. Hearing his wife redefine family in my ear and choosing comfort over correction. I didn't argue with him. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't let my voice shake. I simply said, "All right," in the same tone I used when I finished collecting the last piece of information I needed. Terrell exhaled like he was relieved I wasn't making a scene. Yasmin's voice returned, sweet as syrup. "We'll plan something soon," she said. I ended the call without answering, set my phone down, and stared at the quiet kitchen like it had changed shape. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't text anyone. I made a decision. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was tossing and turning, but because my mind was too still to pretend it needed rest. I lay there listening to the quiet of my own house, and I kept seeing Terrell's face in that article, smiling beside his wife like I was a distant relative instead of the woman who had built the ground he was standing on. Anger would have been easy. Anger would have been satisfying. Anger also would have made me sloppy. So I did what has saved me every time life tried to bait me into being emotional in public. I reviewed. When someone disrespects you publicly, review them privately. I said that out loud to myself in the dark, not as a mantra, but as a reminder of who I am when people try to drag me into noise. By morning, I had 2 folders open on my dining table, 2 lanes of truth spread out like evidence. One lane was the company. With the other lane was the home Terrell and Yasmin were living in, the life they were calling close family, while their bills still moved like they belonged to my hand. I started with the company because it was easier to keep my feelings out of it. Numbers are honest. Dates don't flatter anybody. I opened the last report I'd received from Terrell's team and noticed how thin it was. More celebration than substance, more forward-looking language than hard deliverables. I made notes. One, I checked what had been promised and what had been delivered. I looked for the proof that milestones were being hit, that decisions were being documented, that approvals were happening the way they were supposed to. I didn't need to interpret every detail to know the shape of what I was seeing. The work was moving, yes, but it was moving with the looseness of people who think the rules are optional because the money is familiar. When I saw a vendor payment that didn't match the timeline they had described, I saw a service subscription that looked like convenience instead of necessity. I saw a gap where a required update should have been. Little things, quiet things. The kind of things that don't break a company in one day but can break it over time when nobody is watching. Then I moved to the second lane, the part Terrell liked to call personal, like personal means invisible. Then I opened my banking app and scrolled through the automatic drafts the way a woman scrolls through messages she's been avoiding because the truth is sitting in plain sight. Mortgage auto draft, utilities, insurance, school-related costs. A recurring payment that covered childcare on the days Yasmin liked to be available for meetings. I stared at that list until my throat tightened, because the humiliation wasn't just that they didn't invite me, or the humiliation was that they didn't invite me and still expected my accounts to behave like family. I ran my finger over the screen, slowly, looking at the amounts not as money, but as permission. Every transfer was a quiet permission slip. Permission for comfort, permission for image, permission for them to talk about independence while still living under my quiet protection. I thought about the way Terrell said later into my ear, like gratitude could be scheduled, like respect could be postponed until it was convenient. I thought about Yasmin's laugh, how it carried certainty. A laugh like that comes from a person who believes there will be no consequence, not because she's evil, but because she's comfortable. Comfort makes people careless. Comfort makes people bold. I held my phone in my palm and felt how easy it would be to call Terrell and demand an explanation. I didn't do it. And I wasn't going to give him a conversation he could twist into drama. I wasn't going to let Yasmin label me emotional and use that label as a shield. I was going to draw a boundary so clean it couldn't be argued with. The company lane was complex. It involved timelines, deliverables, approvals. The household lane was simple. Voluntary support is a choice. A choice can be paused. I sat at my table. We opened the transfer schedule I had set up months ago, an automatic monthly amount that went out to cover what Terrell called stability, while the company was getting off the ground. I stared at the screen for a long moment, because this wasn't punishment. This was clarity. This was me refusing to finance disrespect. I could hear my own voice in my head, calm and firm. You can't call me family when it's convenient and a stranger when it's celebratory. And I tapped the button to pause the next transfer. The screen asked me to confirm. I confirmed. No shaking hands, no dramatic sigh, just one quiet decision that changed the shape of their month. Then I set my phone down, looked at the 2 open folders, and felt my body settle into that familiar stillness. The stillness that comes when you stop hoping people will do right and start responding to what they've shown you. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. I closed the company folder first, then the household folder. Then I stood and rinsed my coffee mug like it was an ordinary morning. Somewhere across town, a draft was already scheduled to run like it always did, because that's what drafts do. They don't know a relationship has shifted until the money stops behaving. The mortgage draft didn't clear. The first ring came before my coffee finished brewing, sharp and impatient, like whoever was calling believed I owed them my morning. I let it ring twice. Not out of spite, but out of discipline. I've learned that when someone is desperate, they talk more if you don't rush to rescue them. On the third ring, I picked up and said hello the way I say hello to strangers. Polite, measured, giving nothing away. Yasmin didn't bother with greeting. Her voice came fast, clipped at the edges, the sweetness from our earlier calls scraped clean off. "The mortgage didn't go through," she said. "I just got an email. And the utilities, there's a notice. And they said the account is past due." I held the phone to my ear and watched steam rise from the kettle, slow and steady, like it didn't know anything about panic. Yasmin kept going. "The nanny texted me this morning. She said she hasn't been paid, and the school, there's a balance. They emailed Terrell. He's in the shower, but I saw it." Her breath caught on the last part, like she'd been running through a list all night, like she'd been rehearsing this call the way she rehearsed everything she thought she could control. Then she said the line that told me she still didn't understand what had shifted. "Did you send the money?" She said it like a question, but it carried expectation. Not humility, not apology, expectation. I didn't answer right away. Silence is a mirror. It forces people to hear themselves. I could hear Yasmin's breathing through the phone, a little too quick. The sound of a woman trying to stay composed while her comfort starts to wobble. I pictured her standing in a bright kitchen that wasn't paid for by her confidence, staring at a screen full of overdue notices with her nails perfectly done because she still believed presentation could hold up a collapsing month. "Calandra," she said, softer now. "Terrell said the transfer usually hits by now." There it was. Not my name as a mother, my name as a schedule, my name as a system. And I glanced at my countertop where my phone sat, where I had paused the transfer with one clean tap. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. I kept my voice even. "You're talking about household support," I said, "not the company." Yasmin made a small sound like she didn't appreciate me separating what she preferred to keep blurred. "It's all connected," she said quickly. "He's building. We can't have distractions." Distractions. That's what they called their own responsibility. I listened. And in the background, I heard movement, water running, a door opening. Then Terrell's voice muffled. "Who's that?" he called out, casual, like nothing serious could happen without his permission. Yasmin covered the mouthpiece for a second and said, "Your mom." I heard his footsteps, the quick change in his tone. "Mom?" he said, now closer, like he'd taken the phone or stepped beside her. "What's going on?" His voice wasn't angry. It was concerned, but not in a son's way, in a man's way. We're in a man noticing a system isn't working. I let him speak first. I let him feel the discomfort of not knowing. The mortgage didn't clear, Yasmin said, louder now, like she wanted him to hear the seriousness. The utilities are sending notices. Terrell exhaled hard. Mom, did something happen? He asked, and I could hear him trying to keep his pride intact even as the ground shifted. He didn't say sorry. He didn't mention the launch. He didn't say my absence had been wrong. And he went straight to logistics. That told me how deeply they had trained themselves to see me. I smiled then, not because I was amused, but because I could finally see the shape of their dependence without any decoration. Something did happen, I said softly. I learned my place. Terrell went quiet. Yasmin went very still on the other end, like she didn't know whether to interrupt. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them listen. Then I gave them what they deserved. My calm, not my comfort. You said you only invited close family, I reminded her, my tone gentle enough to sound like manners. Start there. The air on the other end changed. You can hear it when entitlement runs into consequence. Yasmin's voice rose slightly, then corrected itself into politeness, but the tightness was new. Calandra, that was just, she began. I didn't let her finish, not with anger, but with finality. This isn't an argument, I said. It's a boundary. Terrell tried to speak. Mom, we were going to, he started, and his words trailed off because he didn't know which lie to choose. I kept my voice steady, the same way I keep my hands steady when I sign something that changes everything. The household transfers were voluntary, I said. They won't be automatic anymore. No insult, no lecture, just closure. The kind that leaves no room for negotiation. On the other end, I heard the tiniest sound. Yasmin swallowing, Terrell breathing out like he'd been punched without being touched. So what are we supposed to do? Terrell asked, and it wasn't dramatic. It was real. It was a son realizing adulthood doesn't care how proud he is. I didn't answer the way a mother answers. I answered the way a woman answers when she refuses to be treated like a utility. You'll figure it out, I said quietly, the same way you figured out who counted as family. I ended the call before they could pull me into pleading or anger. I set my phone down and looked at my reflection in the dark screen for a moment. My face was calm. My heart was steady. I had drawn the first line and they had felt it. Then I opened my laptop again, not to rehash what they did, but to look at what they had signed. And then I reviewed the license. The email landed in my inbox the same afternoon I reviewed the license. Neat and professional, the subject line polished like someone trying to keep urgency from sounding like fear. It wasn't from Terrell. It wasn't from Yasmin. It was from the enterprise partner Terrell had been talking about for months, the one he called his break, the one he mentioned whenever he wanted to sound like his company was already too big for my questions. The message wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse. It simply requested documentation, proof of ownership, confirmation of governance, and the most recent reporting that matched the milestones outlined in the agreement. In the corporate world, that's how trouble announces itself, politely in bullet points. I read it once, then again, and I could feel the shift in the air. Expansion wasn't just about excitement. Expansion was about risk, and risk always demands receipts. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't forward it. I waited because I knew Terrell would feel it before I ever said a word. He would feel it when his phone rang and the voice on the other end stopped congratulating him and started checking him. Less than an hour later, he did call me. Fast this time, no later. No curtain of Yasmin's voice smoothing the edges. Mom, he said the moment I answered, and the word came out tight, pressed like it hurt his pride to say it with urgency. We have a situation. I stayed quiet, letting him speak into the space he'd been keeping from me. They're asking for documents, he continued, rushing. The partner. They want proof we own what we say we own. They want governance confirmation. They want reporting like, no official reporting. They said it's required before they expand. His breath hitched on the last part. That expansion was his trophy. That expansion was his proof to himself that he could stand without me. It's fine, he added too quickly. We have it. Yasmin can't find the file, the one with the licensing language. Licensing language. He said it like it was a minor nuisance, but his tone told the truth. He had finally opened the drawer he thought would never matter. And I asked him where he was, and he told me he was at the office. I could hear it in the background, phones, keyboards, voices clipped with stress. Yasmin's voice cut through once, sharp and low. "Tell her we need it today," she snapped, then softened as if she remembered she was being heard. Terrell didn't correct her. He just swallowed and kept talking. "They're waiting," he said. "They're saying rollout is paused until they can verify." Paused. And that word sits heavy when a company is living month to month on momentum and reputation. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of his launch. I didn't mention the mortgage. I kept my voice calm. "What exactly are they asking for?" I said. Terrell hesitated. "They want a letter," he admitted, "confirming the IP is owned by the company and that there aren't restrictions." He paused again, smaller now. "And they want confirmation from the investment side." He didn't say my name, but I could hear it sitting behind his words like a shadow he'd been avoiding. Yasmin took the phone then, or leaned close enough that her voice flooded it. "Calandra, we need you to email the partner," she said. And for the first time, her tone carried something that sounded like respect, but it was really urgency trying on manners. "This expansion is time-sensitive. Terrell has been working day and night for this." I listened to her speak and thought about how quickly a person's attitude changes when comfort is threatened. "Send me what they asked for," I said. "The exact request." Yasmin made a sound like she didn't want to hear instructions. "We don't have time," she began. Terrell cut in, voice strained. "Mom, please." That "please" was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in weeks. My son was panicking, or when it wasn't because he was afraid of losing money, it was because he was afraid of losing his moment. I told him to forward the email and the call notes, and 10 minutes later, I had everything in front of me. The partner's compliance checklist, the request for confirmation, the line that mattered most. Documentation showing the company's rights to operate and scale without hidden constraints. I opened the agreement they had signed and went straight to the section they had skimmed. And the words were plain. The company was operating under a conditional license, pending the satisfaction of certain conditions: timely reporting, governance compliance, milestone verification. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a trap. It was structure, built to protect capital and prevent chaos from wearing a confident face. The problem wasn't the license. The problem was that Terrell and Yasmin had treated the conditions like suggestions. I called Terrell back, and when he answered, his voice was raw. "We can fix it," he said. "We can send the reports. We can—" He was talking fast, trying to outrun the truth. I stopped him with one sentence. "You can't send what you didn't do," I said quietly. On the other end, there was silence, heavy, stunned. Then his voice came softer, the pride thinning. "So what does that mean?" he asked. I looked at the partner's request again, then at the license section again, and I chose my words carefully, because this was the point where he would either learn what structure is or keep calling it control. "It means the partner is doing their job," I said, "and it means you're going to have to satisfy what you signed." Yasmin's voice rose in the background, sharp with frustration. "This is ridiculous. We built—" Terrell cut her off this time. "Yasmin, please," he whispered, and the whisper told me he was finally scared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. And I simply spoke the fact that turned their world on its side. "For this expansion to move forward," I said, "they're going to need my signature." By the time we sat down in that conference room again, Terrell's big break had turned into a paused rollout and a waiting inbox. You could feel it on him the moment he walked in. His shoulders were still squared, but the confidence had cracks. He looked like a man trying to hold his image up with both hands. Yasmin walked beside him, chin lifted, or dressed the way she dressed when she wanted to remind everyone she belonged in expensive rooms. She didn't look at me when she entered. She looked at the seats, the table, the faces, calculating where power might be sitting. There were fewer smiles this time. The air didn't carry celebration. It carried consequence. My attorney was already there, calm as ever, a stack of documents laid out in clean rows like he was setting a dinner table for truth. Two of the investors I brought in were on the call screen at the far end of the room, their faces framed in neat video boxes. Another was present in person, quiet, professional, no interest in drama. Terrell glanced at the screen and tried to summon his founder voice. "Thank you for joining," he started, and it sounded rehearsed, like he was trying to keep himself in the center. My attorney didn't interrupt. No, he let Terrell speak until Terrell ran out of performative energy and the silence forced him to stop. Then my attorney slid a single-page summary across the table toward Terrell and Yasmin. "This meeting is being called under the investment vehicle's rights," he said, and his voice was respectful but firm. No emotion, just jurisdiction. Yasmin's eyes flicked down to the summary, and I watched her mouth tighten at the word rights. Terrell cleared his throat. "We're handling it," he said quickly. "Well, the partner just needs clarification," he said, just like he wanted to shrink the problem into something he could still control. One of the investors on the screen leaned forward slightly. "Clarification requires documentation," he said, not unkindly. "Documentation requires compliance." Terrell nodded too fast, like nodding could replace the missing pieces. "We can send what they want," he insisted. "We can pull the files." My attorney let him finish. I've then turned one page over in the stack and pointed to a section with his pen. "The issue isn't the existence of a license," he said calmly. "The issue is whether the conditions have been satisfied." Terrell's jaw worked as if he was chewing on his own pride. Yasmin spoke then, smooth but sharp. "We've been building nonstop," she said. "We've been focused on the product." She said product like it was an excuse for neglecting everything else. One of the investors glanced at her with the faintest impatience. "Building is not the same as governing," he said. Yasmin opened her mouth, then closed it. Terrell shifted in his chair. "So, what do you want?" he asked. And there was frustration underneath, not at the situation, but at the fact that he was being handled. My attorney didn't match his tone. He slid another page forward and said, "We want to protect the company's ability to expand." That line landed in the room with weight. Why? Because nobody could argue with protection without sounding reckless. "The enterprise partner is doing due diligence," my attorney continued. "They're requesting proof that the company can operate at scale without undisclosed constraints." Terrell's eyes flicked to me for the first time, not warm, not angry, just searching, like he was finally seeing me in the room as something other than a mother. "So, what happens now?" he asked. His voice lowered on the last word. I didn't speak immediately. I watched him. Watch the tension in his throat, the way his eyes were trying to decide whether to blame me or blame himself. The room stayed quiet. Then my attorney asked the question that made everything snap into place. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't dramatize it. He asked it the way a man asks for a signature at closing. "For the investment vehicle," he said, looking from the screen to the table, "who has authority to sign on behalf of the managing member?" Terrell straightened, ready to answer, like he believed being founder meant being authority. Yasmin's hand moved slightly, as if she was preparing to claim it by proximity. I spoke before either of them could. "I can," I said, calm enough to sound like I was stating my address. The room didn't react loudly. It didn't need to. You could feel the shift in the air the way you feel a door close softly behind you. Terrell's face changed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but in the small, honest ways men change when they realize the power they've been performing isn't the power that matters. His eyes lowered to the documents, then lifted back to me, and I saw it in him. The understanding that the investors weren't loyal to his image or Yasmin's polish. They were loyal to the structure I built because the structure is what keeps money safe and companies alive. Yasmin's expression froze in place, her control slipping at the edges. Terrell swallowed, and then spoke quieter than he had in weeks. "So, you're the one who can move this forward," he said. I didn't smile. "I'm the one who can ensure it moves forward correctly," I corrected, still calm. My attorney slid a final page onto the table, and his voice stayed even as he said, "Given the current compliance gaps, we're recommending temporary operational oversight adjustments under governance until conditions are satisfied." Terrell's head snapped up. "What does that mean?" he asked, and the fear in his voice was real now, because he understood what was being taken from him wasn't money. It was unilateral control. My attorney didn't answer with emotion. He answered with procedure. "It means operational oversight is being reassigned." Terrell didn't call me Mom when he asked to see me that night. He texted my name like we were strangers with history. Calandra. No greeting, no softness, just a location and a time. I arrived early anyway. One, because I wasn't interested in letting my son pace himself into a story where I was the villain. He met me in a quiet corner of his office building's lobby. Glass walls, soft lighting, the kind of space designed to make conflict look out of place. Yasmin was there too, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched, dressed like she'd prepared for a fight that needed to look respectable. They looked like a united front, and I respected them for that, even as it disappointed me. People are supposed to stand with their spouse. They're just not supposed to stand on their mother's neck to do it. Terrell didn't sit right away. He stood across from me with his hands clenched at his sides like he was trying not to shake. His eyes were red around the edges, not from tears, but from stress. "Did you plan this?" he said, and the words came out rough, like he'd been holding them back since the meeting. There was no greeting, no check-in, no apology, just accusation. Or I didn't flinch. I didn't get offended. I looked at him the way I look at men in negotiation rooms when they want to make emotion do the work of facts. "I structured it," I said calmly, "the day I wrote the check." Terrell's face tightened as if I'd slapped him with paperwork. Yasmin's lips parted, then pressed together, her eyes narrowing in that polite way. People narrow their eyes when they're trying not to look hostile. "So you admit it," Terrell snapped, voice rising before he caught himself, and the lobby air felt suddenly thinner. A security guard glanced our way and then looked away. Terrell lowered his voice, but the heat stayed. "You set us up," he said. "You waited for a reason to take control." He said take control, like control was a trophy I needed, like I hadn't spent my whole life building things quietly without needing to be seen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his anger with mine. I didn't wait for a reason, I told him. I prepared for reality. Yasmin stepped forward half a step. "Terrell has been working day and night," she said, and her tone had that familiar blend of defense and performance, like she wanted the world to hear how hard they'd tried. "He built the product. He built the team. He built the momentum. None of this happens without him." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "That's his execution." Terrell's jaw flexed. "Then why are you doing this?" he demanded. "Or because execution without governance collapses," I replied, still calm. Terrell's eyes flashed. "It's my company," he said, and this time his voice had something wounded under it, like a boy insisting on his room. "You can't just come in and it's your company to run," I cut in gently, "and it's my structure that keeps it standing." That sentence landed hard because it didn't insult him. It just corrected him. The kind of correction you can't argue with unless you're willing to lie out loud. Terrell's shoulders rose and fell in a sharp breath. "That's not fair," he said, and for the first time his tone cracked into something close to honest pain. "I didn't want people to think I only got here because of you." There it was. Not greed, not just ego. Fear. The fear of being seen as somebody's son instead of somebody's founder. I watched him say it and felt something in my chest shift. Not toward pity, but toward understanding. Yasmin's face softened for a second, and I could tell she understood that fear, too, because she had been feeding it. Then her expression hardened again. "We set boundaries," she said. "That's all we did, boundaries." "You called it boundaries," I said, "and then you used those boundaries to erase me." Terrell lifted his hands, frustrated. "We didn't erase you," he insisted, and he sounded like he needed to believe that for his own sanity. "It was just a launch. It was just—" He stopped, because the words weren't strong enough to hold the damage. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just present. "You heard her say I wasn't close family," I said quietly. The lobby noise faded around that sentence because it wasn't about business anymore. It was about respect. Terrell's eyes flicked away from mine. Yasmin opened her mouth, ready to explain it away, ready to smooth it with tone. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on my son. "You were right there," I continued, your voice steady. "You let it stand." Terrell swallowed, and I saw the cost hit him in real time. The cost of silence, the cost of choosing comfort over correction, the cost of letting his wife draw a line through his own mother and thinking it would never matter anywhere else. His mouth opened as if he wanted to defend himself, but the defense didn't come. The contracts had already spoken. The investors had already moved. The partner had already paused. All that was left was the truth he couldn't unhear. He looked at me then, and his voice came smaller than before. "So what now?" he asked, and he didn't sound like a founder anymore. He sounded like a son realizing his silence had a price. The next board session didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a hospital, clean, quiet, efficient, and necessary, because something fragile had been left unattended for too long. Terrell logged in early, camera on, face set like he was trying to hold his pride in place with muscle. Yasmin sat just off to the side of his frame at first, close enough that I could see the edge of her shoulder, her hair perfectly laid, her posture stiff with indignation. I didn't greet them with warmth or coldness. I greeted them the way governance greets people, by opening the meeting and naming the agenda. My attorney was there. The investors were there. A finance professional we had vetted was there. We introduced with a simple title and a calm presence. No grand announcement, no dramatic tone, just people taking their seats in the order the documents already decided. Terrell tried to start strong. "We can handle our own operations," he said, and he made his voice sound like leadership even though it carried fear. "We just need to get the partner off our back." One of the investors nodded slowly. "We want the same thing," he said. "Now, that's why we're doing this." That line landed on Terrell like a weight because it was true. You can't argue with protection when your company is standing in a spotlight. My attorney spoke next, reading the resolutions the way a pastor reads vows, clear, unembarrassed, and binding once spoken. Interim financial oversight, spending controls, reporting enforcement tied to milestones, updated approval limits, clarified signatory authority. Terrell's eyes flicked across the screen as each item was listed, his face tightening in small increments. Yasmin's expression didn't move much, but I could see her jaw working. She hated the sound of boundaries when they weren't her boundaries. "This is excessive," she cut in, voice measured but sharp. "We're not criminals." Nobody reacted emotionally. That was the part she wasn't prepared for. In her world, resistance always invited debate. In my world, Resistance invited receipts. This isn't about punishment, my attorney replied. It's about aligning operations with the agreement you signed. Yasmin's lips parted as if she wanted to argue about intention, but intention doesn't override paper. Terrell leaned forward. I'm still the CEO, he said. He needed to say it out loud like a prayer. Yes, I answered, calm. You're still the CEO. I let him breathe for half a second before I added, and you will report quarterly to the board. Terrell blinked. The word quarterly sounded small until you realize it means your autonomy is now measured. It means you no longer get to move money and call it momentum. It means you no longer get to make decisions and call them instincts. Yasmin shifted in her chair, the edge of her shoulder disappearing from the frame as if she'd sat back, suddenly cautious. Then my attorney reached the part that changed her posture completely. Unauthorized administrative access will be removed, he said, and his tone stayed neutral. This includes non-officer access to financial platforms and approval channels. Yasmin's eyes widened just a fraction before she caught herself. I'm his wife, she said quickly, like that should be a credential. I handle a lot of the administrative work. One of the investors looked at her for a long second. Handling does not equal authority, he said. Not here. The silence after that sentence was crisp. Yasmin's mouth closed. Terrell's face twitched. And I could tell he wanted to defend her, but defending her would mean admitting she'd been positioned where she didn't belong. My attorney continued, access changes are effective immediately. No one smiled. No one gloated. It wasn't humiliation. It was housekeeping. Terrell's throat moved as he swallowed, and I watched him absorb something he'd been avoiding for years. Your spouse can be your partner in life and still not be your partner in governance. Now he tried to regain footing by talking about deliverables. We can send the reports, he said. We can tighten everything. His voice had energy again, but it was desperate energy, the kind that shows up when a man realizes the room no longer belongs to him. The finance professional spoke gently, outlining what would be required to satisfy the partner's due diligence, what documents had to be clean, what controls had to be visible. Terrell nodded too stiff. Yasmin sat silent, and her control slipping into her lap. The meeting moved forward and each resolution was approved with votes that didn't sound like applause. They sounded like inevitability. When the agenda was almost done, Terrell's voice cut through, quieter than it had been at the start. I need to approve an expense today, he said, and he tried to sound casual, but his eyes betrayed him. A vendor, it's urgent. He waited, looking at me, still treating me like the shortcut to authority even after everything. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shame him. I gave him the sentence that cracked ego without touching dignity. You need the boards, I said calmly. Terrell's face went still. Yasmin's eyes lifted sharp again, as if she wanted to fight the idea. Terrell didn't fight. He stared at the screen like he was seeing his own reflection in a way he couldn't deny. This was the moment where he had to decide what mattered more, his pride or his survival. The discovery didn't come from gossip, and it came from a deck, a clean, polished pitch deck that had been circulated to a potential enterprise vendor, then quietly forwarded to one of the investors with a single sentence attached. Is this accurate? That's how the truth gets pulled into the light in business, not with shouting, but with quiet questions that force someone to choose between embarrassment and compliance. I opened the file at my dining table, the same place I'd been making decisions since the first laugh, and flipped through it slowly, not because I was confused, because I wanted to measure how far narrative had drifted from documentation. Terrell's name was there as founder and CEO, correct. The logo was sharp, the projections were ambitious, and then I saw her photograph placed beside his, professionally lit, confidently framed. Underneath it, in bold letters, co-founder. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel rage. And I felt something steadier than that, a quiet recognition that perception had been allowed to outrun paper. The slide repeated it 3 times. Founded by Terrell and Yasmin Vaughn, co-founder and operations lead, husband and wife founding team. Clean language, polished positioning, completely unsupported. Titles don't create ownership, equity does. I said it aloud, not for drama, but to anchor myself in fact. I forwarded the deck to my attorney with 1 line, confirm and advise. And he called within the hour. There's no assignment, he said evenly. No equity issuance, no board approval reflecting that title. Public misstatements like this can create liability exposure in enterprise agreements. That was the line that mattered. Not pride, not marriage. Exposure. When companies expand, partners verify leadership and ownership structures. Misrepresentation, even unintentional, can stall contracts, trigger due diligence escalations, or undermine credibility. The investors responded exactly the way serious capital responds, not emotionally, procedurally. A formal update was scheduled. Terrell was notified that all public-facing materials had to align with the governing documents immediately. No threats, no theatrics, just alignment. The update was drafted the way corrections should be drafted: clean, factual, minimal. It clarified the company's leadership structure. It clarified that Terrell Vaughn is the founder and CEO, full stop. It clarified governance, reporting cadence, and operational oversight, full stop. It did not accuse. It did not shame. It did not use her name where it wasn't legally required. It simply removed fiction and left fact standing. The website About page was updated within 48 hours. Founder language corrected. Role descriptions aligned. LinkedIn bios adjusted. The enterprise partner received formal confirmation of IP structure and signatory authority. No drama, no spectacle. To just correction. That quiet removal did more than any argument could have done. It stabilized the company in the same arena where the narrative had drifted. And it did something else, something deeper. It shifted the story publicly without destroying the marriage privately. Still, I understood what it meant inside that household. A woman doesn't just lose a title. She loses a version of herself she's been presenting to the world. Terrell called me that evening. His voice carried weight. Not anger, not accusation, awareness. They're sending the update, he said. I could hear the humility settling into him. They asked me to speak on the investor call. I didn't rush to soothe him. Growth doesn't require comfort. It requires clarity. You should, I said. Say only what's true. There was a long pause. I didn't think it mattered, he admitted finally. The captions, the slides, the founder language. I thought it was branding. I let him finish. Or branding becomes fact when no one corrects it, I replied, calm as ever. Documentation decides what lasts. He exhaled slowly. I'm going to clarify it, he said. Not defensive, not proud, just resolved. I didn't congratulate him. I didn't remind him of the mortgage or the laugh. This wasn't about punishment. It was about alignment. The next week, on the investor call, Terrell opened with gratitude. To the board, to the structured capital that positioned the company for compliance, into governance that allowed enterprise expansion to proceed cleanly. He did not dramatize it. He did not apologize publicly. He acknowledged reality, and in business, acknowledgement is correction. When the call ended, the expansion moved forward, clean, documented, verified. I didn't raise my voice to be heard. I didn't need to. The same world that saw me erased saw the structure that kept the company standing. The enterprise deal didn't return with fireworks. It returned the way real wins return, quiet, documented, and impossible to deny. After the compliance work was done, after the reporting finally matched what had been promised, after the controls were visible enough to satisfy people who don't gamble with their reputations, the partners sent a short confirmation. Rollout approved, expansion moving forward. Terrell forwarded it to the board within minutes like a man eager to prove he could be trusted again. The investors responded with brief acknowledgments, not applause. In grown-up rooms, approval is often the only celebration you get. The finance professional stayed on, not as a punishment, but as part of the company's new muscle. Spending stopped being a reflex and became a decision. The team started moving with a steadier rhythm, less frantic, less performative. The company didn't just survive the correction, it matured under it. Terrell learned to speak in facts instead of slogans, and he learned to prepare before he promised. He learned what it feels like to have to explain a number to people who don't care how tired you are. And the funny thing was, once his ego stopped fighting reality, he looked lighter, not weaker. Lighter. The kind of lightness that comes when you stop pretending you're self-made and start honoring the hands that held the ladder while you climbed. At home, the silence shifted too. The bills stopped calling me because they had no reason to. Nana, Terrell and Yasmin didn't suddenly become saints. They became responsible. The household became self-funded in a way that was noticeable, not because it was glamorous, but because it was quiet. No more last-minute panic calls, no more casual expectation that my accounts would cover the gap between their image and their cash flow. The mortgage got paid on time because it had to. Utilities were handled because adulthood doesn't accept excuses. With the school balance cleared because it was no longer someone else's problem. Yasmin didn't call me to apologize. She didn't call me to argue. She simply became quieter. The way people become quiet when they realize the room they thought they controlled has rules they can't charm their way around. She was not destroyed. She was repositioned. Her influence didn't disappear. It just stopped reaching places it didn't belong. Terrell didn't come to me with speeches either. When he didn't sit at my table and cry dramatic tears. What he did was smaller, and because it was smaller, it felt real. He started showing up. He started calling without needing something. He started speaking like a man who understood that respect isn't only for strangers with titles. One afternoon, he came by my house with no laptop case, no presentation face, just his regular self. He stood in my doorway and looked around like he hadn't been there in a while. "I'm speaking next week," he said. "The investor update, in person." I watched him hold the words like they mattered. "They asked me to do it," he added, then hesitated. "I want to do it right." I didn't rescue him from the discomfort. I simply nodded. "Then do it right," I told him. He swallowed. "Yasmin thinks it'll make us look dependent," he admitted. The old fear trying to crawl back in. "The truth makes you look disciplined," I said. "Only insecure people confuse truth with weakness." He stood there a second longer, and absorbing that then gave me a small nod like he was accepting a hard lesson without fighting it. The day of the update, the room was bright with those clean corporate lights that make everyone look sharper than they feel. The investors were there. A few industry partners were there. Terrell stood at the front in a dark suit that fit properly, not flashy, not trying too hard. He didn't search for applause. He didn't smile like a boy posing for photos. He opened his laptop, hot-clicked the first slide, and began with numbers. Progress, stability, compliance, rollout timelines. He spoke carefully, without exaggeration. He sounded like a man who had been corrected and decided to grow instead of sulk. When he reached the part about governance, he paused. Not long, just long enough for the room to feel the shift. He looked up and his eyes found mine where I sat near the back, not centered, not showcased, just present. His voice steadied. "When we launched," he said, "I believed execution was everything." He didn't say it like a confession. He said it like a lesson learned the hard way. "What I learned," he continued, "is that execution without structure collapses under expansion. The reason this company is standing here today is disciplined capital and governance." He let those words sit. Then he did what he should have done before the laugh ever happened. That discipline came from my mother, Calandra Vaughn, he said, simple and direct. No gushing. No performance. Just truth. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. People nodded the way people nod when something finally aligns. I felt something warm move through my chest. Not pride as in vanity, but pride as in relief. My son was finally speaking like a man who understood what held him up. When the meeting ended, people came to shake my hand quietly. Terrell walked over last. Yasmin followed behind him, face composed, eyes cautious. Terrell didn't hug me for the room. When he just leaned close enough to speak where only I could hear. I should have corrected it that day, he said, voice low. I didn't know the cost of silence. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had finally grown into the weight of what he asked for. I didn't lecture, I didn't punish, I let the moment be what it was. Now you do, I said softly. And as I sat there, with the echoes of that laugh finally replaced by something steadier, one truth settled in me like a foundation under a house. She thought not inviting me made her powerful. She never realized I was the structure that made the company possible.